Alright, welcome back to Wild West video number 3. Alright, we finished talking about the Indian Wars and now we're jumping into ranching, cattle, beef, yum. Okay, sorry, that was a little weird. Let's get started though. Alright, so cattle is becoming a big business in the West during the latter part of the 19th century. All right. Texas Rangers are going to learn how to handle the Texas Longhorns from Mexican Rangers when they move in. Okay. All right. There's a lot of vocabulary that is borrowed. That or the for the cowboy or the cowman. The term vaqueros. The Cowboys actually originated from Mexico. Most people don't know that, but anyway. But some of the things we have, like vanilla, Bronco, Mustang, Chops, Mosquito, Pronto, Tuna, Stampede, Tornado, Tuna, Stampede, Tornado, Chili, Cigar, Shack, Savvy, Siesta, Wrangler, Lasso, Lariat, Ranch, Corral, Burro, Canyon, Bandit, Fiesta, Gorilla, Hurricane, Matador, Plaza, Rodeo, Vigilante, Desperado, Cockroach, Buckaroo are all terms we borrowed from Mexican cowboys. It's kind of interesting. All right. Okay. There's one other thing. In case you didn't know, the Texas Longhorn that is popular was is a breed of two different cows. When the Spanish came over and the English came over and settled North America, the Spanish cows and the English cows bred together and created the Texas Longhorn that you see here. Okay. Beef becomes more popular than ever after the Civil War. Okay, the demand for it is going to surge. All right, thanks to urbanization and the rise of the railroad, it's going to be instrumental in increasing beef consumption. So a lot of railroad carts are going to be full of cattle. Okay, full of delicious beef waiting to be consumed. Okay. The Chicago Union Stockyards was a famous meatpacking district after 1865. This here is what a refrigerated railway car looks like. Now, long drives is when cattle ranches that were too far away from the closest railhead, so ranchers had to have the crews drive the cattle across the open country to the nearest train. This took weeks. We call this the open range, okay? And cowboys would spend days after days taking cattle up these trails that you see here, all the way down up to places up here where the railroad went. Because back then, most of the railroad was not in this part of the country. So they'd have to go all the way to places like Dodge City, Abilene, Kansas, Wichita, Kansas, Kansas City, Missouri, all the way down from Texas and take cattle back and forth. So they would, ride the cattle all the way up and then they would ride back down. This could take months at a time depending on where they were going. Now, Abilene, Kansas became famous for it being a place where the Chisholm Trail met the railroads. All right, the Chisholm Trail is probably the most famous trail. It ran through most of Texas and Oklahoma. There are markers in Texas where you can actually visit it today, and tens of thousands of cattle came from Texas to Oklahoma to Abilene via the Chisholm Trail. Okay, once they arrived in Abilene, Kansas, the cattle would board the rail cars and head to all kinds of destinations across the country. All right. So here's a better L. You got the Chisholm Trail. This is the most popular. Went to Ellsworth, Kansas. Pretty sure there's a song from somewhere in there. We have the Sedalia and Baxter Springs Trail, heading to Sedalia, Missouri, and Baxter Springs, Oklahoma. We have the Western Trail that goes from Bandera to Agafala. All right. Let's see. And then, of course, the Goodnight Loving Trail that went all the way up into Colorado. These were all the railway roads connected. Okay. Ah, beautiful buffalo. Alright, so what is this? Well, normally this is a question I would ask the class, you guys, that if you were in person, what you think this is and how it's going to change life in the West. This is called barbed wire, and it's going to change everything. It's also going to change how we even affect major wars. Now, just about as soon as ranching began, as soon as it became a big business and a huge profiter, the cattle frontier will meet its end. Because of overgrazing, bad weather, and barbed wire are going to be responsible for the end of the open range. Alright, that big open range that goes all the way across Texas, all those trails are going to be cut off because people are going to put barbed wire along their property to keep stuff in and to keep other things out. Okay? Alright, we move into white settlers settling on the Great Plains. First, I want to talk about a concept called manifest destiny, which goes back to I believe the 1820s and 30s. This is the belief that the United States was meant to expand across the continent from sea to shining sea. It's an old term, but still was one of the driving forces behind white settlers moving into the West, and black settlers too by now, since slavery is now over. So why would people want to move west? Well, we have push factors and we have pull factors. Here's the push factors. Cities are overcrowded, they're nasty, they're disgusting, people are throwing poop out the side of the window. And then we also have, for the African American settlers, oppressive Jim Crow laws growing on in the South. What about pull factors? What is pulling people in? Well, new ways to make money. Mining for gold, silver, diamonds, farming, and ranching. Okay, if you don't know what the difference between farming and ranching, farming deals with crops, ranching deals with animals, typically cattle, cows, beef, tasty, delicious beef. So, railroads are going to help open the West up. In 1815 to 1871, we're going to see huge land grants that railroads will have to lay track in the West. This helps the Western settlement. Everywhere track is going to be laid, cities are going to be built across the country, and they're going to grow. Cities like Abilene, Wichita, Ellsworth, almost all the major cities in Kansas were originally rail towns along the railway, and that grew the population. Now, granted, the population there is still smaller than some places, but although if you've ever been to Omaha, Nebraska, that city's huge. Anyway, I'm digressing again. Anyway, the 1860s, we see the Central Pacific goes east from the California, and the Union Pacific will go west from Nebraska. Nebraska, not Nebraska. Anyway, they meet in what is a town called Promontory Point, Utah, and this creates the first transcontinental railroad on May 10th, 1869. What this meant is that we now have a railroad that connects from one ocean to the other. And I believe what used to take like 6 months to go across to get San Francisco to New York took 6 months. Now I believe it can get there in 6 days. I'm not certain on that, but I want to say 6 to 10 days. Of course, you're making stops along the way, but still, that's amazing. Talk about a huge innovation. Okay? Alright, railroads is gonna help. They're gonna sell the land left over to farmers, and that's gonna attract many European immigrants. We're gonna see hundreds of thousands of Europeans settle the West. Alright? Just like others did a century earlier in the 18th century, which is 1700s. That's when the United States was created. Those settlers came in, and except they were in a different part of the country doing the same thing. Okay? That's kind of funny thing about our country is we are a history of immigration. Everybody is descended from somewhere else almost, except for Native Americans. I, for one, have descendants that are Cherokee Indian, and everybody else is from Europe. So, which is kind of weird. To think that I have a settler that I mean a relative that was on the Trail of Tears is heartbreaking. To think that I have a settler that risked everything to start a potato farm in Idaho. Okay? Or to think that I had a settler that was German that came over here in the early 20th century and faced oppression during the First Great War for being a German. It's amazing. Okay? Let's continue. Alright, so this here is a picture of where the two railroad points met with the Central Pacific and the Union Pacific. Alright? And one of the things they did was when they got to the meet, they laid a golden spike to mount the occasion. Alright, so this here is the railroad that connects the two from Omaha to Sacramento, well, technically San Francisco, but Sacramento, and then Promontory right there. And here's a better view. One of the things that made this railroad very difficult, you had a lot of European immigrants working on the eastern half, and then you had a lot of Chinese and Japanese immigrants working on the western half. On Thursday, you're going to watch a video where you learn more about this railroad. Okay. All right, settlers are going to move westward. All right, the federal land policy and the Transcontinental Railroad will lead to the rapid settlement of the American West. Back in 1862, Congress passes what's called the Homestead Act, which offered 160 free acres to any head of household. So, mostly men, but could very well be women too. All right, 1862 to 1900, we will see 600,000 families settle in the West. All right, the railroad, state agents, speculators will profit 10% of the land to families. Okay. We're also going to see African Americans will move west during post-Reconstruction from the South to Kansas. They're known as exodusters. Okay. In 1889, a governmental land giveaway in what is now Oklahoma is going to attract thousands of people. And in less than a day, 2 million acres will be claimed by settlers. Some took possession before the government had declared it open, and this became known as the Sooner State. Right? This is where the Oklahoma University gets their mascot. And then 8 years later, Oklahoma becomes a state. The closing of the frontier. In 1872, Yellowstone National Park is going to be created to protect some wilderness. All right, it's going to take place primarily in Wyoming, but also in Montana and Idaho. Okay. The 1890s, there's no frontier left, and so there was, in a way, a lot of people feel a regret of loss, like something is lost by not having the open range anymore. In a way, there is, but the one thing that you got to remember is that this is going to become immortalized in Hollywood. Okay, so we talked about today. We talked about the open range. We talked about how beef became huge. We talked about how settlers moved west, and we talked about how railroads helped get them there. And that's where we're going to end today. Thank you for listening, and make sure you're answering the questions on your note sheet as you watch this video and the others.